We're in the heart of the Washington wine country, about 2 hours east of Seattle in the town of Zillah. I'm meeting with Patrick and Matt Ron of the Two Mountain Winery, and I'm going to find out what it's like to be winemaker for a day.
You just kind of go down the aisle here.
Like I was telling you, I drive through on a four-wheeler, and I literally close my eyes, and the first cluster I touch, I take 2 clusters per acre.
2 clusters. So this right here is pretty much enough for...
Yeah, take a few more though, because we're kind of in the same spot here. Walk down a little farther.
And what kind of wine grapes are these?
This is Cabernet Franc.
Okay, Cabernet Franc. How is that different than a Cabernet Sauvignon?
It's a different variety of grapes. In terms of its finished wine characteristics, it's going to be not quite as big, not quite as
physically big or taste big?
Taste big.
Physically,
the clusters are actually much bigger than Cabernet.
Right.
Berries are bigger.
So you actually can taste this. It's pretty sweet, huh?
And actually, Cabernet Franc is one of the parent varieties for Cab Sauv. Cab Franc.
How many acres do we have out here at Two Mountains?
There's 30 acres here.
30 acres. So when you're harvesting, do you do it manually or by machine?
Everything's done by hand. We do it all by hand.
So they don't ripen all at the same time then, right?
They do. If we do a good job growing them throughout the season, and we prune right, and we shoot thin right, and we cluster thin right, they should all be ripe at the same time. And we do.
Is that a bad thing? Because then you'd have to harvest all at one time.
Well, the varieties will come off at different times.
Oh, I see.
But within the Cabernet block, we'll pick the whole Cab block.
Oh, I see.
At the Cab Franc block or Cab, we'll pick
the essence of when they're ripe.
Exactly, they're perfect. And we choose to hand pick because we give our crew the ability to leave out these little, people call them grenades. This is secondary growth. So these are actually not as physiologically mature as those.
Oh, I see.
So these came out late, so we don't want our guys to take these, which is why a machine takes everything.
Got it. So you have the primary growth, which is kind of lower.
Yep. And then anything that's up high and this little stuff, and we give our crew, we tell them, when in doubt, leave it. It's just not worth it, just leave it. We look for, when we're deciding to harvest, we're looking at Brix, which is a measure of sugar. We're looking at the pH, and we're looking at the TA, which is the total amount of acid in the wine. And so we're looking at those 3 things, and then most importantly, what does it taste like? And that's probably the single most underrated attribute when you are deciding what to harvest, because what it tastes like here and the attributes it has here in the vineyard are going to translate all the way through to the finished wine that's sitting on your table 3 years from now. Pick out a few grapes out of just off a couple of the clusters in there, and squeeze them into your hand. The seeds are still really pulpy and that flesh sticks to the seeds. That's a sign that it's not physiologically mature yet. Once you've tasted them, then we get to do the fun part and mash them up. And we're doing this because the reason we sample 4 or 5 clusters, and when I sample a whole block, I'm going to take 2 clusters per acre randomly, top, bottom, middle, east, west, middle of the plant, outside of the plant, to try to get a representative sample of the block as a whole. And so we'll do that, and then we'll measure and taste from that. So this is sort of a quasi-representative sample for our purposes here. So when you mash them up, pour a little bit of your juice in here. It'll be easier to taste it out of that. So now that you've got your cup-oed wine juice now, what we're going to do is we're going to taste it. So just take a taste and just, kind of swirl it around, see what you taste out of it. So now you've had one taste, kind of sweet, and what you're going to take, now taste it, but what we're really looking for is you feel that acid in your mouth, that little bit of acid kind of on the edges of your tongue. As it reaches that level, it's going to move back. It's going to start wide on the front of your palate and get kind of narrow and move through the middle of your palate and then open up again on the back. That's a good thing. That means we're getting there. That acid, that's going to mean the wine has a really long finish when it's a finished wine, which is a good attribute.
So from out in the vineyards, Patrick showed us exactly the right time to pick the grapes, and they've actually harvested a whole bunch of grapes here. They've taken them through the stemmer and crusher and crushed the grapes into here, and this has actually been inoculated just last night with yeast, and this is what you're getting out of it. And I will actually fill this up to get the hydrometer to see what the density of the liquid is, and it's incredibly technical. It's like a laboratory here, and you got to think about 4,000 years ago when the Romans were drinking wine, how, you know, what kind of wine that they created. It was just making grapes rotten and drinking it. You know? From the vineyard to the vats to the tasting room, we followed this, the grapes to the wine, and now 3 years later we have the fruit turned into wine. And Candace here will pour me a nice little taste, a little sniffy sniffy. Amazingly, it tastes very similar to the grapes I tasted in the field, and maybe even a little bit like the wine in the vat. Man. Just got finished tasting some wonderful Two Mountains wine. Matt, thanks a lot. Learned a lot on making wine. And Patrick, some wonderful grapes growing out there.
Thank you for coming out. Hopefully it allowed you to connect the dots from the vineyard to the winery.
It was great. Till next time, see ya.